Okay, Charles, and land?
Land, again, yes, I mean, something we talk about persistently for all sorts of reasons, but underpinned usually by the suggestion that we should not absolutely be growing food on it. We should be restoring nature and forgetting about the fact that the world's population is expanding. But in fact, before we come to the UK, we look at Brazil, where there's a tweet from DEFRA saying that Daniel Zeichner, the minister for DEFRA, has been at the G20 talking about sustainable agri-food systems. And of course, as with all these written documents, we see simply that food security is playing second fiddle to what's called nature recovery. This is the website itself about the G20 agriculture part of the Brazil meeting. Now, the reason this is pertinent, because it coincides with the campaign for national parks, among others, effectively flagging how little of the national park infrastructure in the UK is owned by the state. And they are lamenting the fact because they say that their health check report showed that only 6% of national parks currently effectively protected for nature. The next government needs to set out radical reforms to make these vital national assets wilder and accessible to all. The next Prime Minister must seize the opportunity to renew and revive national parks. Now, this goes back to the 1949 Act, which was supposed to grant the public access to areas, wilder areas, particularly in close proximity to large populations, concentrations of population. And the reason there's been sort of debate triggered now is not because it was in the Labour Party manifesto, but in effect they did make a sort of qualified pledge to be able to deal with this. And this has been highlighted now by a chap called Guy Shrubsole, who's recently written a book called The Lie of the Land, which has got a lot of traction in certain quarters. And he points out that just 10% of Britain's national parks are owned by the nation, 90% being privately owned, and he says that the park authorities are almost powerless to influence the private landowners. So the inference being that land in private hands is bad, land in state control is good. So he goes on to say the new Labour government needs to complete this unfinished business. Ministers must update the legal purposes of national park authorities so that restoring nature is their primary mission, and give them powers and resources to buy land for nature and for the nation. Now, it'd be very easy to look at a sort of simplified version of this without realising to what degree the baby would be thrown out with the bathwater, and to question whether or not government or state ownership and management of large tracts of land would really be any different. But nonetheless, they're pushing ahead with it. The national parks here in Northumberland and the Brecon Beacons, to give two examples, looking for project officers, but specifically relating to what's called natural capital, which I have spoken about quite a bit in the past. And just a reminder from March 2023, nature markets, which is really what natural capital is derived from, and it's described as a framework for scaling up private investment in nature recovery and sustainable farming. And the definition of a nature market would be a mechanism for private investment in nature through the sale of units of ecosystem services, which are delivered by nature restoration projects or improvement to land or coastal management. So the point that seems to be lost here is that in people's enthusiasms for schemes of nature recovery, first of all, they're forgetting the enormous amount of control the government does actually have over private landowners by all the various environmental schemes and subsidy with which they may exert a sort of carrot and stick influence, but also the erroneous suggestion, or at least one that lacks evidence, that the government would in fact manage the land any better. And in effect, this would be trading private ownership for corporate ownership via the financing of these natural capital schemes. So it's yet another theme in the idea that food security doesn't really matter. It's all about grabbing the land for nature recovery. We'll keep an eye on where this goes.
Okay, and we're going to finish